everybody. I know there's a lag a little bit, so hopefully I'm starting off and you can all hear me. I'm Kaitlyn Johnson. I'm with Corvisiero Literary Agency, and I'm going to be answering your questions on the submission process, submitting queries, submitting what agents do when they submit you to editors, and all sorts of stuff. So I'm just going to jump right into it because we've only got an hour for this. But the first question is, do you have advice for writers trying to up their mental health during the submission process? Because, you know, a lot of people get feeling down when they get the rejections from their queries and stuff like that. I can't stress enough having community, having like a critique group, friends that you can kind of commiserate with. Like it is a hard process. It's a really hard process. And agents go through it too when, you know, we work with editors and we get lots of passes for these manuscripts that we absolutely love and think should be on shelves. So we understand where you're coming from. So it's just really great to have people to lean on and to talk to about it. And don't be hard on yourself, because a lot of the times it's just that agent isn't a fit for it, or they can't connect with it. And you don't want an agent who can't connect with your book, because even if they think, you know, you're a good writer, if they don't like your story, they're not going to sell it as well as somebody who does like the story. So try to remember it's not a personal thing. And if when in doubt, you know, invite friends over, have some ice cream. I always, you know, have a good glass of wine. So just try to get that community going, because that's the best thing for really keeping yourself positive, basically. And question 2 is, how do you celebrate your first publication, acquisition, or client? There's a lot of different ways. Me personally, I mean, like I said, I do enjoy a glass of wine. Wine is beautiful. But also I probably try to find some chocolate somewhere. I try not to eat a lot of chocolate, but yeah, it's different for everybody. And then I freak out and, you know, obviously talk to my whole agency and the agency, and we all like freak out on our little video chats. So just the usual. Question 3, if you've gotten good feedback and requests despite a pass, does that lead you to believe your query's working? And is there any reason to hold off on sending out more? A lot of advice says query in batches, make sure the query works and you don't exhaust your list. But is it necessary when the feedback is relatively positive? When the feedback's positive, but it's still a pass, I'm still behind the whole query in batches, because they're right. If your query's not landing or your synopsis isn't landing, it is better to do an edit and tweak it so you don't have your entire list has already said no, and now you're like, well, I have no one else to send it to. If you're getting good feedback, though, double check if the feedback is like similar to each other. Like if certain agents are saying the exact same thing but in different ways, like your first 5 pages, they're not connecting with your character, or there's passive voice or the world building. That's where you need to go back and look at it again. If it's world building or something like that, you need to maybe get a critique partner and have them and say, like, what's not working? Why isn't this 3D? Why can't you feel like you're in my world? So check if the feedback is repetitive, because that means there's a certain thing that's turning people off. I would still say, even if your feedback's positive, query in batches, and keep a spreadsheet of who you're querying to and when you've sent it and how long they've had it, because you don't want to double up on people at the same agency. Or send somebody your manuscript 6 times, which has happened. Keep a record of what you've been doing so you don't get caught in any faux pas and stuff like that. Question 4, what is the most important aspect of the submission process? We joke about this, but following guidelines, probably rule number 1. We have them for a reason. I know it's difficult that different agents have different guidelines. Some people like 1-page synopses. Some people don't care how long they are. Some people don't even want them. But we have them because it makes us go through queries a lot faster. And it shows that you're willing to work with us, that you're not a difficult writer. If you follow our guidelines, it means that you can take direction and you can still kind of give your voice and give your story while still maintaining structure. If you decide you want to be special, or you think you're more unique than other people and you'll stand out, you won't. You're going to look like you just blatantly disregarded the rules. And not even the rules, just our preferences. So yeah, follow the guidelines. Just do it. It'll save you a lot of stress in the long run. Question 5. Acquisitions meetings are a kind of special mystery. What are some of the reasons you've heard for why a book is stopped there? Oh, there are so many reasons, and I hate them all. I've heard of some where it was a debut author and the sales team or the acquisitions team didn't feel it was a strong enough book to risk the money on. Like it was a great book and great writing and potential, but they weren't 100% sure it would sell enough to make their money back. So they decided no. Another one was it wasn't own voices, so they turned it down there. Another one was they loved the story, but it needed edits still, and they didn't want to take on that large an edit. It really just depends. Acquisitions meetings are really, it's an editor loves the book, wants to sign it, and they take it to their board and they pitch it, basically how you would pitch to us or we would pitch to the editor. But they also do a profit and loss statement of like, where is this book sit in the marketplace? How much money, like could we compare it to see how well it might sell? And if the group's not on board, or if 100% they don't agree with it, or the sales team doesn't agree with it, that editor doesn't get to put that book through, which is a shame. But can you identify the most common error you see when critiquing work? I see a lot of passive voice. A lot of first pages, instead of having a main scene that's active, like we are actively inside something happening, and it doesn't have to be like a chase through a marketplace or something, it can be something subtle. But I see a lot of people like trying to input backstory by the main character going into memories or like thinking back on why they would do this because something happened in the past. And I'm immediately like, I forget what the first scene was even about. Like, what was I doing? Why was I in this scene in the first place? So stick to that first scene. Otherwise, your reader's immediately going to feel ungrounded. They're not going to connect with it. That's the major thing. And also, your synopsis is not your query, and your query is not your synopsis. Learn the difference. I get really upset when I see, like, in the synopsis box, there is a summary in my query, or see above, and that's not correct. So make sure you know the difference. When you are reading to decide to take on a client and the book is not quite ready to submit to editors, what is it that makes you offer? What kind of it needs work are you willing to go through with an author? So I'm an editorial agent. I actually take on things that need a little bit more work sometimes. But if the voice is really, really strong, and I know it's hard to say voice because it's hard to define voice. You either have it or you don't, or you're building it and growing it. So it's hard to actually tell you the specific thing, but I'm a big person and like I read the pages and I can picture the characters, I can picture the world, I can feel the emotions, I feel like I'm inside those characters. And it's so 3D that like I just love it, and I have to work with it. I have to tell them that I love it and like make sure it can get to the best possible spot. If it's too much work, especially once an agent gets more and more clients, it's harder to do more in-depth editing because you just don't have the time. So sometimes we do a revise and resubmit, and usually the agent will specifically say, like, I want you to revise. If you revise this of the feedback I gave you, I would take another look. And a revise and resubmit is usually word for word they say that, and they give you edits and they're like, I would love to see your work again. If you did this, this is what's lacking, this is what needs to be worked on. Not every agent does that, only some do. What makes your query stand out to you? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Words. What makes a query stand out to you when you're receiving countless submissions? A unique hook. I can't tell you how many times I see a query that outlines a very basic plot, like person lost their parents and now goes into a foster home and fights drugs and gang war or something like that. And I'm just like, there's 100 books that can go along this plot, or very similar veins, or look at every book on the shelf and the query just seems like the same thing. You need to tell me what's unique about your story. I need to see, like, say the setting's really unique, or the conflict is something that I haven't seen before. I need to see that twist. Otherwise, you're going to sound like everybody else, and I might not even go to your pages. I try to most of the time, but if it's hardcore, like something I'm just like, I don't even see what's different about this, I've seen 100 books like this, that's going to make your query suffer. Ooh, the long one. Having queried a lot, I get rejections with helpful comments sometimes. My question is, the most recent email from a publisher says they're submitting to the editorial department. Never had this comment. Any idea what that means? Good, bad, indifferent? If a publisher is sending it to the editorial department, that's actually pretty good. it's promising. It means they are seeing what the other department thinks about if they would publish this book, how much work is included in it, if it would be profitable, if it's marketable right now. That's a good sign, actually. I think just wait it out. Depends how long they make you wait. I would check in with them after a month. And I'm not exactly sure on that because usually it goes agent to publisher. But yeah, that's promising for you, definitely. Usually they'll just say yes or no. When submitting a book to publishers, what does that process look like? Is it similar to the author's query process? I apparently can't talk today. It is very similar. We do send a pitch, just very similar to your query, but we tweak it and we make it a little bit more keyed into the editorial of what place in the marketplace it fills, stuff like that. And we send a synopsis and we send the full manuscript. That's it. We send it and we research an editor list. And normally I have like spreadsheets and they're all color coded and it's tedious, but it's very similar to what writers will do to agents. And we're just trying to find the best fit and tell them exactly why they need that book. We also sometimes set up like phone calls with them to see if they are looking for something like that or something our client has. So we can kind of pitch multiple works to them and see which one grabs them. So it's very similar. It's a little more hands-on though. If you only get form rejections in response to your query, how do you go about figuring out what's wrong or what isn't landing? Critique partners, beta readers, friends who all read different genres, have them read your query and tell you what's not working. I can't stress enough critique partners. They really help you get different eyes on it and get people from all walks of life. You want to get different lenses, something they'll see that you didn't see or something they'll see that two of your other readers didn't see. That really is going to help you. You can also enter like contests for a query critique, and query critiques aren't very expensive if you go to an editor or something like that. I know I charge like $15, I think, but like you can do research online and find places to get your query. And a lot of people will swap queries with you on Twitter and stuff. They'll swap with you. They'll say, you look at mine, I'll look at yours, and we'll brainstorm. So, sorry, I've been sick all week trying to pull through here. But that'll help your query a lot if you're getting just the form rejections and not really any guidance. General etiquette of checking in with agents who have no response times listed on their website. So if they have no details on their website at all, I always say give them 3 months. After 3 months, check in with them. And then if they're still not answering, check in every 2 months after those 3 months. But if they have it for like, I don't know, 9 months to a year and you have zero talking with them, nothing back from them, close it out. That's a long time to wait, especially if you're doing a list and you're not sending to new ones until those ones get back to you. Close it out and move on. Excuse me. Either their box is too full and they're too busy with clients, so they may not be able to give you the attention you need anyway, or they have a no answer is a no. So I would say check in at 3 months, though, definitely. How do you prefer a query structure? So me personally, I like the metadata, which is your word count, your title, your genre, your age category, and then the agent personalization, like why you chose me as a fit in the first paragraph. And I give this structure to all my clients. Second paragraph is introducing the main character and the situation they're in at the beginning of the book. The next paragraph is introducing either the secondary character, if necessary, and the conflict of the book. And then the next paragraph is introducing the stakes and what's at risk for that character. And then the last paragraph is your bio. That's my love. That's perfect for me. I like to know the metadata so I know exactly what I'm getting into. Some people prefer going right into your pitch, and then the last paragraph before your bio is like the metadata and all that. So, or sometimes people bookend it with like metadata first, agent personalization last, or swap. So it's different, but for me, that's my go-to. I really like that structure. As a marginalized writer, do I have to share every marginalization of my main characters? I share 2 out of 3 of the main character in my work in progress. Is that enough, or would I just have to justify what I wrote about something? Okay, So this is difficult. I personally don't think, like, you definitely don't have to fit every single facet of your character. If that happened, nobody would write. Nobody would write anything new anyway. It's great if you share a certain point that it is own voices in some way. If it's not, different agents and different editors have different views on this. If you're writing something that is about like the experience of being a certain thing, like say being Black, being marginalized, being disabled, and you're not one of those things, that sometimes is frowned upon. That sometimes is what's going to get your query rejected, just because it's the act of being something that you can't understand if you've never experienced it. But if you're writing about characters that are just characters, and they happen to not be your race or your culture or something like that, and it's not about being that culture or being that thing, that's different. Sometimes that is a much different way of writing and more acceptable. It's different for everyone, so I can't give you a real answer on that. But no, you don't have to fit every single facet of your character, because again, I don't think that's realistic. And you don't have to state your connection to these things. It's like trying to make somebody say its own voices because it's a story about being trans or something. If they don't want to say that about themselves, they don't have to. So again, you shouldn't be forced to do something like that. If that all made sense. That was rambling, sorry. Talk a little bit more about R&Rs, which is revise and resubmit. If an agent gave extensive detailed feedback and say they'd like to see the manuscript again, is that an official R&R? Or would the agent use the actual words revise and resubmit? Does the agent expect that if the revision notes are used, that revision is exclusive? So I'm going to tackle the exclusive part first. Nothing is exclusive unless an agent says exclusive. If they do not specifically tell you you can't send it to anyone but me, that's not exclusive. And I know very few agents who do that, unless they're like dying to have that manuscript. But I don't know many, and I never do exclusive because I don't think that's really that fair. I love revise and resubmits. Not everyone uses the exact same words as revise and resubmit. If they're giving you long, detailed feedback like that, I would assume it's a revise and resubmit, because we don't have time to do that half the time. If we're giving you nice, detailed feedback like that, we liked it and we saw potential in it, and if you make the revisions, we'll probably want to see it again. That being said, you can always email back and be like, is this a true revise and resubmit? Just checking so that I don't, cross any lines. I welcome people asking for clarification on that, just in case, because it does show that you're respectful as well. You don't want to, impede on anything. But usually if they're giving you that much feedback, they're usually interested in seeing it again. What are some of your personal query pet peeves? Ooh. Oh, I don't want to hear not like so-and-so is not like other girls, or so-and-so is special. I don't like hearing that. We hate that line. I also don't like hearing spunky or feisty, because sometimes like those in the industry have become kind of condescending to characters. I don't like when the whole query is your bio and you're just talking about you, or you're just giving me the themes of your book and I have no idea what your book's about. You're like, this book tackles family relationships and overcoming addiction, and I'm like, I don't know who your character is. I don't know what the actual conflict is. You need to actually like give me a hook. Give me the details of your story. Themes and stuff, if the agent really likes your story and they want to set up a call with you, talk about themes and all that and inspiration and stuff on the call. It gives you something to talk about and bond with. In the query, I just want the meat. I want exactly what your book's about. I want the nitty gritty. We can get to know each other later. That's fine. Those are probably my big pet peeves, is when they just talk about themselves, though. It's oh, and if you have your genre or age wrong, make sure you know your age category or your word count for the genre you're writing. A lot of people give us stuff and then and it's quite clear they've like never researched what their word count should be. If you've passed on one or more manuscript from an author, but later fall in love with another and offer representation, will you go back and work with the writer on those other ones, or will the previous no remain a no? It's a very good question. Sometimes people like fall in love with your manuscript, but they have rejected a former manuscript. You need to figure out when you do the call where they're offering representation, ask them that exact question. Ask them why they passed on those in the first place. If they're willing, if they liked the story, but they just weren't willing to do that much editing, they should, as your agent now, be willing to go back and do it. But if they decided it wasn't marketable, it wasn't a good plot line, it's too repetitive of what's already in the market, they should tell you that and be like, we're going to focus on your works going forward. I don't think those are right for the marketplace, and I don't think editors are going to respond to it. They should be completely like forthright with you. They should be honest with you. And that happens with my current clients. They give me like a page of because some of my clients have a million ideas in their heads. They'll give me a page of pitches, and we will go through them together and talk about which ones are promising, which ones probably won't work right now, which ones should go on the back burner, or which ones just sound outlandish and like aren't going to work. And we'll focus on what to write next. So your agent should be willing to really talk about that with you. If they're not, if they give you very vague answers and like, oh, we can look at those later, like we can talk about it after you accept my representation, that may be a red flag for you because they're hiding something. When you say to close out a submission when you don't hear back, do you mean to say that one should email the agent again and thank them for their consideration? And since you didn't hear back, you're assuming not interested? I would say yes. Always email them and tell them you're withdrawing your submission, just in case. Because some places you think if there's no answer, it's an automatic no, but maybe it's not the case. And like a year later, you get a random query rejection. I would send it just in case. Just send it and be done with it. Because then you have a paper proof too that you withdrew it. So if they're contacting you about it, you can be like, look, man, I did this. You didn't answer. We're done. So yeah, I would always send the email just in case. Is there anything an author can conclude if they're getting form or generic rejections on partial or full? Well, first, congrats for getting a request because that is a hard part. I would think if you're getting a full rejection, like a rejection on a full, I hope they're giving you feedback. If they've read your entire manuscript, I hope you're getting something out of that. That's what I do. If it's a partial, it could really mean that either your character development isn't there or your plot development's not there. If it's a full, usually it's either the agent just didn't fall in love with it, or there's something in your plot or your character's not working. If they're not giving you feedback after requesting pages, I'm sorry. They should be. You can always, email them back and be like, can you tell me why it was like it's a no if they didn't tell you already? If they tell you a bit, don't ask for even more because they're not going to have time for that. But if they don't give you anything, I think it's okay if you email them and just be like, any advice you can give at all on why this was a rejection, just so I can edit and move forward with it. So yeah, that's really my thing is that it's different for every agent for rejecting something. What kind of process do manuscripts normally go through once they're submitted to an editor from submission to an offer? So after it's been edited and worked together with the agent and the writer and they decide it's ready for editors, usually agents are going to do it in rounds. You don't want to be sending to like 50 editors and then get a bunch of feedback from editors because it's similar to writers where we get feedback and realize something needed to be revised and that's why it's not getting picked up and then have to pull it from 50 editors and rewrite it. You don't want to do that. So normally agents are going to send out to batches of editors, compile the feedback, and talk to the editors, basically. Be like, thank you. What are you looking for? Like, what, if we did a revision, would you be willing to look at this again? Stuff like that. On the way to offer, though, usually if the editor really loves it, they're going to notify us, or they're just going to go ahead and do it. And they're going to go to higher ups, and they're going to try to take it to their boss, then take it to acquisitions, and then the sales team. So there's a lot of people to go through before that book can actually get the offer full out. And normally, when that's all done, the acquisition teams, the sales teams, the editorial teams, they all agree on it. The agent will get like a deal memo, stuff like that. That'll tell them like, if you're getting an advance, what royalty rates maybe are going to be. Is it going to be print and digital and all this other stuff? Or is it just going to be print? Or is it just going to be digital? So we're getting all the details. And your agent should notify you, and you should go over things. And then once you guys have all the deal memo stuff kind of set out, that's when the agent contacts the editor and they agree on something and they send the contract to the agent. And the agent should go over the contract with you. That agent should not be the only eyes on that. Just saying. because you should go over it and you should have questions for them. They should explain what certain things mean to you, and you should decide together. An agent cannot accept an offer without your acceptance. Remember that. If I receive an offer from an agent, but I'd like to hold out on accepting to hear back from a more desirable agent, how would one approach that topic with said agent? So, this is touchy because I've actually been through this where I offered to somebody and they decided to not take me because they had not been in the query trenches long enough and they felt they could probably do better. So, I was a little upset. What the protocol is, if you get an offer from an agent, you should ask for 2 weeks and then send an email to all the agents who have your query, partial, full, anything they have from you. Send an email out to all those agents and tell them you have an offer. And tell them that this is the date I have to give an answer to this agent. If you could please, respond with whether or not you would like to see the full to consider it yourself. And if an agent thinks it's interesting, they'll tell you, hey, send me the full. I'll try to read it by that deadline. And they'll get back to you with a no, or they will throw their hat in the ring. And you'll have you'll be able to choose between certain agents. If you don't, if it's more that you just want this other agent so badly, and this agent who's offered is not somebody you're connecting with, or you don't feel like that's the person for you, you shouldn't accept the offer because they're not your choice. They're not who you want. And I'm not saying you'll get the other person. So it's you have to juggle. You have to decide what's best for you and what you want to do. But if you're having doubts on somebody, you don't want to accept an offer that you don't feel comfortable about. Blunt, but yeah, sorry. If your author's published book generates some controversy, how would you advise your client to respond? It's a good question, especially with what's been happening in the industry lately. So, first of all, it depends on the controversy that's been brought out. Writers should not engage in comments or reviews or anything like that on their Goodreads page and stuff like that. Authors, just stay away from it. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're going to make enemies somewhere. Just don't do it. If there's controversy, the writer should come to the agent and discuss it. And they should kind of make a plan on it of, does this controversy have merit? Is this something we really need to focus in on? Does this need a statement, basically? It should always be handled delicately. Anger should not be your first thing to go to. So authors should really just stay off social media for a while until they figure out how they want to face this. If it's controversy that's so if my client was in the wrong, if my client was bullying somebody or their book had something I didn't catch, we should own it. We really should. If it's something we believe in and it's from somebody's personal experience, so maybe somebody is reading it incorrectly because it's through their lens and not the writer's lens, and it's something the writer actually experienced and knows, that's different. That may be handled a little bit differently because not everyone can see things the same way. So it's a very dicey subject and everybody leans different ways. But I think if it's solidly something we did wrong, we should own it and apologize to the community. What's the most common issue you notice when editing manuscripts, and how can author fix it? So I talked about passive voice a little bit earlier and falling into memories in the first pages. Editing manuscripts. So I do see a lot of a manuscript I'm looking at recently where there's scenes that don't actually need to be in the book. It's more like, you wanted your character to seem more realistic, so you put a bunch of scenes in there about them hanging out with their friends or them going to the mall, and it doesn't actually tie to the plot. Every scene should have a purpose that builds your plot up to the climax. They should all be interconnected. I've seen a lot where these scenes are just there, and I'm like, I don't understand why I'm reading this. That's a big thing I've noticed recently, and I don't really know why. I don't know where it came from because I didn't see it that often a while back. So that's a huge thing. But passive voice, I'm not going to say it again, is usually a really big thing in a lot of manuscripts. What is the correct word count for middle grade and for YA? It depends on your genre. Just in general, middle grade should be no less than 22,000 and no high. The high point on middle grade has been fudged a bit. Some manuscripts go up to 70 or 75. I personally say don't go over 65. Don't go over 60 maybe. That's really high, 70 and 75 for a middle grade. I would say try not to go over 60 because that's like 50 is a sweet spot. 50, 60 sweet spot. YA, and obviously any age category, if you're doing fantasy or sci-fi, your word count's going to be higher. If you're doing contemporary or historical fiction, they're a little lower. YA, I've seen YA, should be no lower than 50, and usually 50 is still a bit of a red flag because usually there's something in the plot that can be embellished a bit. If you're a debut author and you haven't published anything, like any books, I'm not talking about like articles and stuff, don't go over 110. Try not to go over 100 because, like I said, a lot of the acquisitions groups or sales teams are a little more hesitant to take a bet on a debut writer. So if your book's really long, you may not get that benefit of the doubt. If it's fantasy, it should be higher. It should be like 95, 100 in YA. If you have a 95,000 like contemporary, you might get some raised eyebrows because normally it doesn't need to be that long. Usually there's, like I said, a bunch of scenes that don't actually need to be in the book. But that's the general YA word count is 50 to 100, 110-ish. I know a lot of editors are calling for things not above 100 right now because, again, time, but we have so many out right now that it's really high competition for things like that. Do you have any tips on how to handle the call with an agent responding to your query? Yes. So be natural. I love when I call somebody, and I do video chats personally. I like to see your face. So if you're more comfortable on video than phone calls, because I hate phone calls. I hate them. I like the video chat. If you're more comfortable, ask the agent if they'd be willing to do that. Because again, in my opinion, it's kind of about the writer's comfort. So I would do that. I would do a phone call if the writer preferred the phone call. But be yourself, be natural. Try not to, I know you're going to be nervous. Don't forget we're nervous too. We love this book. We want this book. We're scared you're going to not like us and go to somebody else. So we're both nervous. So just take a deep breath, but have a list of questions ready. There's a bunch of articles online. There's a bunch of writers posting on Twitter about things to ask. Have a lot of questions ready. You need to know what the agent's editorial process is, what their submission process is, what genres they do represent. Because if you say, they're picking you up for a YA fantasy book, but you also write nonfiction, well, I don't represent nonfiction. So if I was taking you for YA fantasy, you might want an agent who does both. So you need to make sure you know all those details. And you also need to know kind of like their communication style. I know my clients, we have a Slack channel where we can all talk and then we can private talk, and I'm on email a lot. I don't usually text or be on the phone with my clients a lot because Slack is so fast and I'm doing so many things, it's just better. So you need to find out how your agent communicates as well. And they're going to have questions for you. Be sure you're ready for stuff like, oh, don't forget to ask your agent what percentage they take of if they sell your book. 15% is industry standard. If it's higher than that, that's a red flag usually. But yeah, the agent's gonna have questions for you about like what other works you have. Do you have anything either being written or have written before or just in your mind? You should always have something to answer to that question because we don't want a one-hit wonder. We want to be with you for your career. We want to work with you through all of that because again, it's a business. We don't want to just take on this one book for you and then you never write anything again and we're just like, well, neither of us are getting money from anything now. Like we're both not succeeding. So be sure you have something else there. That's the big thing. All those big things. Is saying your book is the first in a series a major turnoff? How would you go about that, and should it even be included in a query? I hate this industry because it's so subjective. Everything I say is subjective. I don't mind it. Some editors do if you're a debut author. It doesn't matter if it's part of a series. It needs to stand on its own. So basically that first book needs to have a closure and a plot line that folds up at the end. even if some things are left open for a sequel. If we go through the whole book and like don't find any culmination of the plot, we don't have any like natural satisfaction at the end, it's not a standalone and it has to be a series. And that's harder to sell. Just because you never know if that first book's going to do well. And an agent never knows if that first book's going to get picked up by an editor at all. So you should always think of it as one book. Now, in your query, you can say it's the first book in an intended series. It's a standalone novel, but it has series potential. I do know agents who hate that phrase. I like that phrase. They hate that phrase. So I can't give you a 100% answer. But if it's a standalone, say it's a standalone. If you have intended it for a series and that's what you want, say it is the first in an intended series. It's better to be honest and not look like you're hiding something from the agent. Sorry, I wish I kicked this cough earlier in the week. In regards to feedback, when an agent says they don't connect with the voice, is that a comment that's more in the realm of personal preference, or is it more an issue with the writing on it? It can be both. It can be either or both. Voice is definitely subjective. Like Darius the Great just came out, that book. YA, I think. But I was reading the ARC and I could not get into it. I could not. I could tell it was a great book, but the voice was not connecting with me. That's a subjective pass. Like that would be something that I'm like, it's not me. It's not for me. Which at our agency is when I usually take a screenshot of your query and I'll text it to one of my other agents and be like, is this something you'd want? I will forward it to you if you like it. Because I know it's still good, but it's not hitting my standards. It's not where I really want to love it. So I'll send it to another agent at our agency because it's still good. I don't want to lose that for us. Now, if it's the writing, that may just be your voice needs work. It's not unique. It's not natural or like stilted, awkward terms. Or you just haven't found your sound yet. You're trying to sound too much like maybe somebody you read, or it's flat. It's not full of color. So it depends. For me, if I'm talking about voice, usually it's I liked your topic, I liked your plot or your concept in your query, but the pages just weren't hitting me. What's the difference between a pitch and a query? So normally pitch is in person. It's like, which is later today, elevator pitch, or if you sit down and you like get one-on-one with an agent, that's usually what we would consider a pitch. Query it's a formal query. Is you email in or you use Query Manager and you have your letter, and then normally you'd have your synopsis and your however many pages the agent allows. That's usually what's considered a query. Pitch is a little less formal, a little more of just natural talking. Can you go into what separates older middle grade from young? Sorry. Older middle grade from younger YA. Normally it's age and theme. YA is usually like 14 to 18-ish. Sometimes 13-year-olds, but that's only if it's like a very dark, heavy plot or something that has like graphic issues that would lean towards a more mature audience reading it. That happens. But upper middle grade is your character's a little older usually. It's usually like 12 or 13, maybe 11 if you're stretching it. But the themes are more mature and the voice is more mature. That's key. If the pages of the voice, it's just got more body. It's got a more rounded sound and theme, then that's going to be your upper middle grade. Lower middle grade usually has a lower word count, and it's got more of a childish voice, like it connects with those readers. It's not necessarily for like me reading middle grade. I don't like young voices. I don't like childish voices. I don't know how else to say it. I like upper middle grade because it's got that mature tone. It's got that meatiness to it. That's my terminology, and I'm sorry that if meatiness doesn't tell you what I mean, but that's usually the difference. What, if any, takeaways should be gleaned from receiving multiple rejections with positive comments, but that end with, I just wasn't connecting enough? Is there something an author can do to make people connect enough, or is it that comment in a generic way, I just can't take this on, or some variation, it's not you, it's me? If it's positive, it means you're a good writer. maybe your concept isn't unique enough. Maybe it still feels a little too similar to everything that's already out there. Um, or something wasn't like the characters aren't 3D enough for us to fall in love with them. Like we can picture them and we would like, oh, we like them, but we don't love them. That's sometimes the connecting bit. Um, sometimes it's literally like the concept is not for me. I'm just not into this thing. So sometimes that's like if I get a query for pregnancy and marriage, I don't like miscarriages, I don't like pregnancy books, I don't like anything like that. So if I get a query for it, I'm probably going to tell you the concept's not connecting with me because I don't connect with those concepts. Those are not for me. So again, it's different agents, different answers. I'm sorry, they're also subjective. Seems to be a gap between the ages of 12 and 14. Yes, there is. Thoughts on the age group? Should there be another age category that encompasses that space? I personally just think we need to start accepting more books in those ages. You're right. 13 and 14 is like this taboo year almost. My client actually just wrote a book with a 12-year-old though, so cross your fingers it'll be on shelves someday. But 13 and 14 is like this weird in between that nobody writes about. 14 especially. 14 is like this invisible age now. And I think it's just because 13 is such a notable age because you're a teen now, you're not a preteen. And then 15 is like driver's permit and stuff like that. 14 doesn't get written a lot because it's so in between and your audience just isn't defined. You don't know if middle graders are going to be reading it. You don't know if YA is going to be reading it. I just think we need to find more books with these characters. I don't think a new section should be made, though I think a section on new adults should be made. But yeah, I think it's just more about getting more books out there like that so it becomes more prevalent. With other conferences I've attended, some editors' agents accept queries with a certain amount of time. Do you practice this as well? If not, I understand. If yes, what's the best way to do this? I'm unsure what you mean by that. Do you mean like in-person pitches, which I'm not doing for this conference? I know a few other agents are though. Or do you mean there's like a span of time where if they request your stuff at a conference, they want you to have sent it by this amount of time? Me personally, if I request you at a conference, send it whenever. I hate to see it like a year later because then I'm like trying to remember it because I've been to like 6 conferences since I saw you. The sooner the better, but don't send it till it's ready. We don't want to see something that you rushed through because we'll be able to tell that you rushed through it. I hope that answered your question. Do authors ever have more than one agent? I write picture books, but also write short stories for adults. It depends. I do know there are some writers who have 2 agents, but usually it's if you do like nonfiction and then something like fiction on one side and nonfiction on the other. Short stories could qualify for that because like say I don't represent short story compilations. I don't do picture books either, but like say an agent does picture books but not short stories, you would need to discuss that with the agents because they would both have to agree. You can't just get an agent for a picture book and then get an agent for a short story and not like tell them. That would be a big no-no. So it depends. I know it's happened though. What in general is the biggest red flag in a query? Word count probably. If I get a query for a YA contemporary and it's 258,000 words, which has happened, not surprisingly to me, but to you maybe, that's a huge red flag because you don't know your industry, you don't know your genre, like you don't, or the biggest red flag is if you have like say a YA and the character's 40, that's not a YA. So age group and word count probably is the biggest red flag because it's a basic. It's you can look up an article on Google and find the answer to that. That's probably my big thing. Do you also keep an eye on what middle grade YA books are doing well overseas, English language markets, or are you just too busy keeping up with the US market? We do keep up with that. I get Publishers Marketplace, so I get their email every day that tells me the new sales, what deals were just made, what rights were just sold for different titles. And we definitely try to keep track of that because we do submit to publishers who either want your foreign rights because they have connections overseas and they want to sell it, or we're going to keep your foreign rights and try to sell it overseas. So we need to know all the houses that are like acquiring over there as well. So we definitely do try to keep up with that. trying to find the separation, sorry. What about duologies? Yes, book 1 stands alone, but the story isn't complete without book 2. Is it okay to query a planned duology? Yeah, you just say it's book 1 of an intended duology instead of saying an intended series. 3 books has been popular recently. I don't know if we're leaning towards 2 books right now. It still isn't clear. So I personally like duologies. So, but yeah, just use that terminology. Because the subject matter of my current manuscript is a tough sell, I've had like 10 agents ask to read my next project. Does that mean I would just send them a query since they didn't specifically ask to read the full right away? Yes. If they read your first one or they got the query and pages for your first one and they're saying like, this is a hard sell, you're a great writer though, so I'd love to see your next work, you would send them a query for the next work. I wouldn't like send them the full, because your work should be finished and ready. It shouldn't be like, well, I have 50 pages of my next one, let me send you that, because you need to be done with the story completely. But in your query, remind them that they read such and such and they asked to see whatever work you next had when it was ready. So remind them of it, because we do forget things, especially after, just depending how much time has gone by. Also, oh wait. Yeah, if you're previously published, but it has been years since your book came out due to unforeseeable life events, is this something you should mention in your query? I would still mention it, that you like put your title of your book in parentheses, say the house it was published under, and then the year. Like say the publisher house, if it was a small press and it closed, that's not your fault. If it hasn't been available for sale because it didn't do well and it went out of print, that's really up to you. You don't have to tell them if you don't want to. If you were previously represented by a different agent, should that go in the query? If so, how much info about that relationship? So in Query Manager, I have little checkboxes for you. And if you were previously represented by an agent, I ask that you check it so I know. If you don't tell me in your query who you used to be represented by, if I like your stuff and I set up a call with you, that's the first thing I'm going to ask. Because we do need to know who you were represented by and why you're not represented by them anymore. Just because, there are authors out there who had a bad relationship, the agent wasn't great, or took too long answering things, so like they left them because they didn't feel the person was right for their career, or the opposite way, that the agent felt the author was hard to work with and they just weren't compatible stuff. So we need to know what we're getting into, as well as you need to know what you're getting into. So I would, if you do say you were previously represented, I would probably like put in your bio you were previously represented by so-and-so, and then leave it up to the agent if they want to talk to you about it more. Would you accept representing a foreign author writing in English to publish in the? Of course. Oh yes, I have a writer who lives in Japan. She's an expat. She lives in Japan. I have another one who lives in Brazil, and they're phenomenal writers. I would never put my nose up at somebody who's not in the U.S. Mm-mm. What defines upper YA? Again, this is going to be, usually we don't use terms like upper YA, just because YA is usually dealing with a lot of mature content lately in the industry anyway. But it's usually the age is up to that top point, like 18, and the themes are a little bit deeper, a little bit, doesn't have to be darker, but deeper, I was going to say. How important is the author's age to an agent? I understand that agents want to build a relationship with the author, but are agents in general open to older authors? There is no age at missing the boat. I know somebody who represents a woman who is just turned 90. So anybody can write good books, any age. That should not be holding them back. Now, if it's young, if it's say like a 16-year-old, if you're great and stuff, make sure if you're that young, you need to have your parents involved. I know recently I had a freelance editorial agent or client that didn't tell me how old they were. And when I realized how young they were, I felt a little bit like I shouldn't have edited for them. I shouldn't have charged them money to be edited, because they're that young. They should be looking for a mentor or critique partner or something like that, and not paying professional editors. So the same goes with an agent. They should know how old you are if you're young. You don't have to like tell them your age if you're in your 20s and all that. But if you're young and in a teen, you really need to tell them that, because they don't want to be kind of caught in this in between of using a teen or something like that. Your parents should be involved if you're that young. New adult, how do you personally see this becoming a thing? Do writers need to just start writing to that market and hopefully it'll gain steam? I want it to gain steam. I really do. There's so many stories in new adult we have. We're accepting new adult. I just noticed that a lot of editorial boards and publishers are labeling it adult instead. There's no actual area, but some have been sold as new adult lately. I think it's getting there. I think we just got to keep plugging forward. Because there's a ton of good stories in that area. So yeah, I think it's got to gain steam. It's got to keep going. We can't give up on it. Last question. What is the best way for an author to find out sales numbers on comp titles? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't really know why you would need sales numbers on comp titles. I get you don't want to be comping your book to something that's uber popular because everybody's doing that. Like if I see Harry Potter as a comp title for you, I'm going to raise an eyebrow because there's 1,000 things in Harry Potter you could be tying it to. And also it's a hugely popular, widely known book that just everybody's using. So try to be unique about it. But even if it's not a huge bestseller, like if it's a lesser known but really good book, you can use that too. It doesn't have to be a huge sales numbers. I know there's programs online that you can find that do sales numbers. If it's on Amazon, you can see what rankings it is maybe. Publishers Marketplace also might have some information on that. But yeah, I don't think you necessarily need your sales numbers for those comp titles. Just pick what's really true to your book. Or if you can't find something, don't include it. So that's all the time we've got. I'm going to be around today, obviously. I got more stuff to do today and tomorrow. But thank you guys for all of your great questions. Hope I was clear. Hope I answered all of your stuff. But thanks so much. I'll see you guys later and have a great rest of the conference.